from the multicolored coat all the way to the salvation of the world of the same operation in each point. Administration, management, stewardship in Joseph. So it's interesting because most people say, oh, he dreamed a dream, he's a prophet. No, actually, he's an apostle, right? He's an administrator, right? The gift of apostleship is to identify resources and identify a need and putting them together. That's it. Identify this person has the gift of this. This person has the gift of this. This person has this need. Match it here. That's an apostle, right? That's an administrator. But the principle is that from that point of view, as he's moving through these timeline events, something is building. But you couldn't tell. 13 years in prison. Yeah, I'm telling you right now, you don't think, he's not going to think. I mean, remember, we're talking about an Egyptian prison. We're not talking about modern flushing water, hot water, 3 hots and a cot. We're talking about probably a dungeon with chains and whips and blood and feces and death and disease. 13 years of that. And yet what's he doing while he's in prison? Administrating. The whole time. He goes from multicolored coat as a family business manager to what? To Potiphar, to the warden, to Pharaoh. And you would have not known these things if you were in hell. You wouldn't have thought in your mind, well, I am the administrator of this prison, and I was the administrator of Potiphar's house, and he's going, my brothers put me in a pit. That piece of junk, believed his wife, right? I'm in this hellhole. I doubt for a moment he was going, yes, well, I did have the multicolored coat, and now I'm managing this prison. No. He was like, why? What did I do so wrong? Right? Okay. And of course, like I said, we have the Christian rhetoric that tries to make Joseph prideful and tries to make it that God is humbling him and punishing him and all. No. Energy of being enabled to do the vision that he was given to begin with goes all the way to the top. And I propose to you that every single time the vision is broken again, because I'm sure there was probably a feeling in his heart when he left, when he was put in the pit and sold into slavery, that whatever he had felt this pull to administrate, and I can't prove to you he felt this pull to administrate, but his life demonstrates that's exactly what was going on. And so I propose to you that that was the vision. I propose to you that that is the function of everything that you see going on with Joseph. Okay? Now, why is this so important? Because at each time, there's just a little bit more added to it. Along with it seems to be a little bit more adversity. But the principle is that as you move through the story, there's a pattern. And it's a vision. And it's not dreaming dreams. That was just a function of everything else that was going on. How did Joseph save the world? Did he save the world by interpreting a dream, or did he save the world by creating storehouses and filling them? You see, there was a faith that was required. There was a faith that was required by even Pharaoh, that there were going to be bumper crops for the next 7 years. Okay? And I propose to you that when it says there was a famine in all the world, that we need to consider the idea that Joseph did actually preserve humanity. It was like a type or a facsimile of the ark. And I also propose to you that in that context, when he had the multicolored coat on, who believed in him first? Who invested in that ability? You know, I don't completely understand the process of preparation for royalty. I just haven't studied it out enough, and I don't necessarily want to speak on it. But my understanding is that, like, when you go to school as a prince, that you don't go to school with the other kids. Maybe you go to military school, or some special kind of school, and in that school you don't learn your ABCs. You learn economics. You learn politics. You learn statecraft. You learn all the things that you would need to know to be a king. And in that thought process, I can say that you can tell when a kid's just not going to work out for that, right? I mean, you can tell when it's like, I would love for my kid to be a doctor, but he's running around with a bucket on his head, right? Okay, you guys get the point. So the whole idea is that Jacob looks upon his son with the potential to begin with, invests in that potential. Forget the dream that he had that definitely bothered Jacob enough that he, quote unquote, kept it in his heart, wondering what it meant. That bothered Jacob. And now what's interesting about that is, as we move forward in that, we find, right, that when Jacob interprets Joseph's dream, he's like, you out of your mind? We ain't going to bow to you, kid. But the truth is that every function of those dreams came to pass. But Jacob was the first to invest in the administrator. So let me explain this to you. There are things you're good at, and there are things that you shine in. And the things that you're good at may give you the impression that you actually are supposed to do that thing. But where you shine, where you come the most alive, that's actually what you're here to do. Now, that may result in you thinking you need to do a career change. And that may result in you needing to adjust your thinking. And that may result in you needing to come up with a better understanding of how to do something, because what you're good at versus what you come alive with may not be the same. You may not be very good at this, but it makes you come alive. What makes you come alive? And I propose to you that you have been put in situations from the beginning of your understanding of the ability to do that thing. It could have been when you were maybe 6 years old and you hung out with the homeless when you were a kid, and now all of a sudden you feel that you need to help the homeless, when you don't remember that when you were 6 years old you used to hang out with the homeless, right? You don't understand that back then the Father was already establishing a heart in you. But all of a sudden you ask yourself a question: what makes me feel most alive? And you look back, and it wasn't horseback riding, it wasn't playing G.I. Joe or being a princess. It wasn't any of those things. It was that moment when you were with those homeless people. And now you understand that you're supposed to get a food truck. So the third group, it's interesting because the third group actually doesn't necessarily equate to the most ideal group. And I'm going to tell you why. They'll wait, but they won't be proactive. So they conclude that the resource is available, and they'll conclude that, the resources are unavailable, but the division is real. And they'll conclude that they need to wait until the Father begins to offer them those resources, or until those resources are come into their lives, and so they know that it's a timing thing, and that's great. But they will never actually be proactive. So the person who believes that they are supposed to have a food truck and is willing to wait and has gotten past the limitation of I can't afford, and I don't have the time, and they've gotten past the limitation of nothing happen, and they've gotten past the limitation of waiting. And the fourth group looks at the situation and says, well, I don't have the food truck yet. But that doesn't mean that I can't do something. And maybe they go and they figure out they can go volunteer at the soup kitchen. Or maybe they go and they find out that they can maybe buy a hamburger for somebody. Maybe they can individually help people. You see, in the end, it's going to be bigger than the food truck, you guys. They see the food truck, thinking that's the thing they need to do. That food truck comes, and next thing you know, you have 7 food trucks. That's what happened with Joseph. I can't imagine, because one of the things that we see Joseph is a very emotional individual, compassionate. And with compassion, unfortunately, means that you can't harden your heart that easy. And if you can't harden your heart that easy, that means that you will be hurt. And he says, God helped me forget my pain. God gave me fruit in this horrible place. Right? That's what he names his sons. But what's intriguing about this is that as he's going through this thing, he actually has this premise that it hurts. And he has this premise that he loves his family, his brothers. He misses his brothers. Why in the heck would you ever miss the person who got you eventually thrown in prison for 13 years? Because no matter how we spin it, his brothers were the cause of his prison. Okay? The beginning of the end, as it were, was throwing him in that pit. The moment they threw him in that pit, this is one of the things I want you to think about. The moment they threw him in that pit, they had to do something. Because why? Because he was going to report that. He was going to report that. I wonder how much of the love of Jacob for Rachel was poured into Joseph as a spirit of compassion. Jacob had 4 wives. He had 12 sons. And Joseph was his beloved. Right? He invests in his son, not knowing that that investment of opening that door is actually going to eventually become the salvation of the world. He doesn't know. Jacob doesn't know what's going to happen to Joseph. He just believes in Joseph. Well, this is going to sound kind of crazy and probably a little bit on the side of Joel Osteen, but the truth is that what you need to do is actually do that within yourself. You need to find out what makes you come alive. And then what you need to do is you need to look at the situation with Joseph and realize that what makes you come alive does not instantly steamroll into a international ministry. What makes you come alive is your purpose. There are some of you who are listening right now who actually have within them a belief that they were a mistake, an accident. Maybe they believe that they're occupying someone else's space. Or maybe they believe that they're breathing someone else's air. But I'm going to tell you something. God don't make junk. And however much your mama and your daddy made you, there's still a flash of light at conception. And according to scripture, in him is the light. Right? In him is the light of men. And so in that context, what I want you to change your paradigm on is that every single last one of you has a purpose here, and it's what makes you feel most alive. That thing that makes you feel most alive may have the death of a vision involved in it. It may have the sentiment and the context of failure. No resources, no time, no motivation. But if it makes you feel alive, it's your purpose. And I propose to you that the limitations of that purpose, this is going to sound crazy, the limitations of that purpose are actually illusions. You see, when Joseph donned that coat, he already was going to save the world. Do you get that? All the stuff that happened in between coat, savior, done. There wasn't this other stuff. It's interesting because it's actually indicated in the Torah scroll. Okay? It's actually in the Torah scroll. I'm going to share it with you, not on the Torah scroll. I'll show you the Torah scroll, but I'm going to share it with you elsewhere. So it's actually here. Okay? This is Miqetz. This is Miqetz. This is the beginning of the parasha. I can't show you the entire parasha because my table isn't that big. I couldn't roll it out all the way. But this is Miqetz. And what you need to know about Miqetz is interesting because what we're working with here is this word right here. End. Okay? See how it says at the end? Let me go ahead and put that up on the whiteboard so that you can see it. So the Hebrew word, or the Hebrew phrase, I should say, is Miqetz. Okay? Pronounced Miqetz. Now, there's a couple things that you need to know. I'll just go ahead and show them to you. We'll jump into the Hebrew here. And here's our word. This right here. There's a slash in between. You can see that the letter mem is separate from the kof and the tzadi. Okay? That is a preposition. And it's a preposition that means from. Okay? From. Now, when we get into the other part, let me go ahead and get rid of this. We get into this part. Go ahead and screenshot that real quick so we can zoom into it. This is the actual word, Miqetz. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do some highlighting here on the board. This is a preposition. Okay. And this is the word. Well, it's interesting because this actually is from. Okay. And this we need to look at real quick. So let's go back to our reference here. And of course, we've got the word katz from the root word katzatz, which means to cut off. Okay. To cut off, or to create a, let's see, how do I want to communicate this? You're going to create a severed end. Okay. So the principle is like, for example, when you get lumber from a supplier, before you build with it, you cut 90-degree angles on the lumber because of the possibility that it was sawn at an angle. You make sure and check and make your own 90-degree angle proactively so that you know for sure that it is actually going to sit correctly in the framing. Okay. That's an example of this cut. It creates a straight end, as it were. Okay. Let me let's go ahead and do our diligence, and we will go into our lexicon. So here's our parent root. Here you go. And that is going to be end, right? As a concrete. Now you notice it doesn't have a pictographic definition, but it does have an ancient Hebrew nomadic definition. In other words, it has a cultural definition. The end of something, or to make an end by cutting. Okay. And then, of course, we've got our word, Miqetz, which is conclusion. Okay. Conclusion. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Remember, I said that this is from, and this is end. So from, end, not at the end. Now let me read the rest of it for you. Let me show you the rest of the Hebrew here. So what it actually says in the Hebrew is Miqetz she natayim yamin. Okay. Miqetz she natayim yamim. Okay. Now go ahead and screenshot that, and we'll go ahead and put it on the board really quick here, because I'm going to actually interpret it, but I want you to have an opportunity to see it in the text itself before I write it on the board. Okay. Miqetz shenatayim yamim. I'll put it on the board. Miqetz shenatayim and then hold on, let me move this up here. Okay. And then yamim. Yamim. Okay. So Let's interpret this literally. From end. Dual years. Days. You see, it doesn't actually say at the end of 2 full years. Now, the way the interpreters looked at this is when they looked at this, they said, okay, the yamim means the fullness of the years because it was days. But you see my literal interpretation, why they struggled with this. Okay? But here's how I want you to think about it. This right here is interpreted as 2 years. This right here is interpreted as full. Let me show you what I mean. Yamim is being interpreted as full. Okay? In fact, let me go ahead and screenshot that so we can zoom in on it. Do you see that? At the end of 2 years full, the years were doubled. There were 7 plenty, and there were 7 lacking. 7 plenty and 7 lacking, which is a dual, right? And then we've got these days. Now, this doesn't say at the end, it says from the end. And so I'm going to propose that what this is saying is looking to the end of days, between the end of days, there is 7 plenty and 7 lacking years. In other words, this is parenthetical, and that actually what it says is from the end of days. Now let's see if that's in the construct for at the end. See, it is in the construct. Meaning you can interpret it of here. See that? It's in the construct form. Common masculine singular construct. All right. So, having said that, that means that it's either from the end of dual years. Why am I saying dual? Well, let me show you that. So this Hebrew word, the root of this Hebrew word is shana. Okay? Shana. So shanatayim is actually a pluralization of the word shana, which means year. Okay? Was there a time in history where Egypt completely ceased to exist? The answer is somewhat yes and somewhat no. And there's definitely the potential that for a while there seems to have been a shift in economy. And there was definitely a failure of the original civilization, and another civilization rose up over the top of it. But did Egypt ever completely cease to exist? The answer is no. In fact, technically speaking, we have Egypt today, although that's a whole lot of history there. and a whole lot of different monarchies and a whole lot of different empires, it has not ceased to exist. And so to say from the end of days, there is almost a sense that this is looking all the way into the future. In between the end of days, right, is these dual years, which is the 7 and the 7.